All right. Welcome to Pater, the Order of Fire Solar Sunday. I'm here joined by Ed Hamon, FiA Taurmenos. And I mean, we're sort of talking about all kinds of things these days, but our general subject of today that we were going to explore a little bit was therapy. Um, Therapy is one of these subjects that has become crucially important in some people's lives, like a central, almost religious pillar of spiritual, psychological, and emotional well being. And for other people, it seems to be this nefarious, spiritual, demonic influence, this danger, this insidious pressure. Um, and so, Ed, you've got some background in this world, do you not?
To a degree. It's right out of high school. My career choice was to become a psychiatric nurse, uh, and so I spent a lot of time. I did that work for a couple of years, but I was in a lot of different environments in clinical training, and then also, uh, you know, in actually working. Um, and there's a lot to all of that. There's talk therapy, based on people's problems, issues, neurosis, but then there's serious things as well. Mental illness is its own category. It's
Sure.
mysterious. And personality disorders, which are also really can be really, really extreme and disruptive. But uh,
Yeah, we don't want to blur like
yeah,
how can I stop having intrusive thoughts in my relationship with like violent schizophrenia.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
there's a
or
range of dysfunction that we're talking about, and therapy as it is used is almost like medicine in like the breadth of its semantic application. Like we're talking about therapy. I mean, therapy is almost a synonym for medicine in many cases. So there's a danger in talking about therapy of talking about lots of very unlike things as if it was one kind of thing.
yeah.
But that said, and howdy, Karate Elvis, nice to have you. Um, the, when we talk about therapy in the colloquial cultural zeitgeist we find ourselves in, like we're all kind of aware of a particular culture of talk therapy. Like that's what we're talking about when the memes go around about how like men will literally do anything other than go to therapy, and it shows them like fishing or hitting their head against the brick wall or like whatever. Like
Yeah.
they're talking about, they're not talking about sending them to get on like benzos or something. Like they're talking about going to see a talk therapist
Yeah,
and a counselor to like work through their problems or whatever. Um,
exactly.
and it's it's interesting because I'm sort of unfamiliar with this world. I'm peripherally familiar in the way that everyone else is. But in the last few days or so, I've been like diving deep into the work of John Deloney, who I think is probably the most prominent and well known and well respected sort of public facing therapist in the country. He is to talk therapy what Dave Ramsey is for like personal finance stuff. He's like on the Dave Ramsey like radio platform. Um, so he's he speaks for a lot of that world. Um, and it was interesting listening to him because there's always been in the back of my mind this feeling that therapy was like a kind of worldview, that it was sneakily training people into its own assumptions and into its own values and things, the values and the worldview of therapy itself. But it was like Schrodinger's worldview, because as soon as I like this is what I was picking up from the side, but as soon as I turned to face it, the worldview vanishes and it becomes just a tool set. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh, it's just a set of tools and mental tools for working through your problems, you know?
Well, sure. I mean, it's designed to make people have a better experience of life. And if that works, then great. But
Yeah.
there is that there is a therapy culture, a therapy worldview. Because if you're on social media, especially TikTok, you're going to see it. You see it everywhere. People are always, "I'm healing." Even sometimes
Yes.
it's even a joke, but people are always always something to be healed from.
I've seen a couple
And there's the
social media
idea.
accounts called Healing from Healing.
Yeah, and the worldview that pathology is the foundation of existence. It's
So
almost like a secret. If you go back to Freud, which Freud doesn't really carry much weight anymore, but it's almost like oh, there's a secret horror, a secret trauma. You might not even remember or know what that secret horror or trauma is,
yes.
but it's the reason you are the way you are, and we have
So
to
let's
reveal it.
get into that, because I think there are two ways we can look at therapy, and anyone who's just tuning in now, we're sort of exploring this. We're not coming in with like super strong opinions on this just yet, but on the one hand, perhaps therapy is actually just a neutral tool set. And this feeling that there's a worldview that's sneakily, insidiously injecting itself into the minds of its subjects under the pretense that it's just a tool set, is just a number and maybe an organized group of activists. But in the same way that we wouldn't judge a religion by its worst hypocrites, but we would rather judge it by its highest ideals and the people who achieve those ideals, so too should we maybe not judge therapy by the people who are using it like a hypodermic needle to advance their own causes. But it's not about therapy itself. That's entirely possible on one hand. However, there are, to the point you just made, I think there are four possible ways we could view therapy as a worldview in its own. The first way is, and I think this is probably the weakest frame, so I'll start with it, is maybe it has some presumptions of what health and wellness mean that all therapists are operating from. I think good therapists probably say like, no. We start with the subject's desires and then we work from there. But maybe a lot of therapists have definitions and working models of health and wellness that not everyone shares. And there's a tacit ideology there. That's possibility one. Possibility two, and this goes to your point about Freud, is the presumption of trauma. All therapy stems downstream from Freud. Obviously, we've come a long way from Freud. One of my family members is a psychology professor, and she's like, Freud is not even really a psychologist. He's more of a philosopher. That's a very disparaging thing to say in the world of psychology. It's like, that's more like philosophy. That's like pseudoscience. But Freud wrote this very interesting book called Civilization and Its Discontents, which basically argues that while civilization is great, it had some costs, right? We had to give something up in ourselves. And so civilization itself is the sort of primordial trauma, the original sin against our soul that we're always sort of subconsciously in need of recovery from. And so that is a sort of, it's a sort of justification for general therapy. So the presumption of trauma is another possibility. We'll call it possibility two. Possibility of three is a view I first heard, I think, from the French psychoanalyst Lacan. But you see hints of it in Stoicism too, which is the internalization of all problems. Therapy seems to begin, and you definitely see it in John Deloney and his book, which I'm about 30 pages into now. Like any external problem that presents itself, it is an external problem, but it is also first and foremost a symptom of something that's going on inside yourself, or inside yourself, I should say. So, head versus chest. So that idea, and in Lacan's language, he said, if a jealous husband finds out that his wife was actually cheating on him and his jealousy is therefore vindicated, his resentment and bitterness is still pathological because of the internal state that puts you in. And it was like, okay, I hate this guy. But like that is a mentality that is very common. It's a very extreme expression of that, but like that the internalization of all problems, I think, is unique to certain kinds of therapy. Not all, again, we don't want to be too broad, but to talk therapy, there's a trend that pops up. Possibility 3. Fourth, though, and I think this is maybe the most powerful one, and it's one you alluded to earlier as well, is if you look at other worldviews, if you look at Christianity, if you look at Islam, if you look at Marxism, if you look at Enlightenment rationalism, all of these worldviews, even if you have a hard time explicitly stating the sort of unifying thesis of that worldview, there is nonetheless a unifying language, a vernacular that all of the adherents of that worldview speak that unites them in how they think. And in that way, I think talk therapists share a vernacular. They share a language in how they talk about things. So aside from trauma and healing, boundaries, the way they use the word boundaries is another really common one. And these kinds of distinct vernaculars, I think, set up the linguistic boundaries of a distinctive worldview that might make it an identifiable worldview. And again, that's not a knockdown argument that it is that. These are just the arguments that I'm thinking about as I'm trying to figure out what this thing is. Because when you look at it in application, what talk therapy seems to be is a tool for deconstructing and reconstructing your own narratives. And that's a very powerful tool. That's a very powerful tool. So it could be very dangerous in the wrong hands, but possibly very good as well. And I think there is a danger of guys suffering a kind of sex pollution. They're like, oh, that's women's thing. We don't want to do anything. And they actually, in avoiding this, they cede the territory and the power of narrative creation and destruction to one side. Does that mean we all need to go out and go through talk therapy? No, it doesn't. But it might be reason to take an interest in this thing and how it works and where it comes from. I think the gears started turning for me in interest on this subject when I read Greg Naj's book, The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, because he mentions the etymological origins in the Iliad. Probably precedes the Iliad by a few thousand years, but there's this word therapon that is like a ritual substitute or a sacrifice or also a servant. So this is like the Hellenic version of a scapegoat, kind of. Patroclus is described in the text as a therapon to Achilles, which has this double meaning of like he's a servant, but he's also a ritual substitute and a body double to Achilles. He dies in place of Achilles. And that principle of substitution, we have to be careful with etymologies and not like letting etymologies run away with our reasoning. But there is something to remembering that like this idea of therapy as like in healing or being made whole or being made well was first envisioned in the context of a ritual substitute, a compensation. That's actually a very big theme in the Iliad. It goes sort of with the blood price. Like, is this good compensation for that? Are we whole? Are we okay now? Mm-hmm. You know? So there's there is a string to pull on there that's worth exploring. Jack says, on the Toro theme, the civilization is the trauma, hints at the trade-off of the bull, which is also the trade-off of civilization. Therapy is also kind of a secular substitute for religious processes. Isn't that funny? Therapy is therapy for religion. I think Freud would get a kick out of that.
I mean, Freud can be interesting, like, you know, when simply considered. It's like considering, you know, but not,
Yeah.
you know, kind of, it's hard for me to explain, but like kind of in like the mythological mind, just some of the conclusions that he came to, it just, you know, makes you think.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm like 10 years behind the ball on like what's in academia, cuz like last time I checked in, everyone looked at Freud like oh yeah, we're so past that. We're so much smarter and better than him. And I
Yeah,
was
that's
listening
that's
to well, I was
skill
listening
is
to
that.
some philosophers of science being interviewed about new challenges to Darwinism. This would have been a couple months ago. And they were talking about Freud, Marx, and Darwin as like the heralds to the end of the old order. You know, evolution was the end of like old Christian creation stories. Freud was an end to old models of the mind, and um,
Well,
the interview.
it's kind of familiar, like civilization, you know, being an inherent trauma is, it reminds you of other people that thought history should end. Other
Right.
Germans.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
Fukuyama or Hegel or
Yeah.
whoever.
Yeah.
But what was funny was these philosophers, I forget who they were, but they were all expressing with great sadness. Like it was really it hurt them to admit it, but they're like, yeah, Darwin is just not as good as we thought he was. You know, we were and the interviewer asked them is like, oh, so you think he's going to go the way of like Marx and Freud? And they're like, well, Marx was kind of never serious, which I thought was amusing. but they said, but Freud was right about everything. Well, not everything, but I was surprised at how these philosophers who were talking about so dismissively about Marx and so kind of just like, yeah, Darwinism it has these problems that we're not sure how to fix. Were very it was like Freud was back in somehow, which is just very, very interesting to hear. So I don't know the ins and the outs of the argument there. I think Freud had some interesting insights, was obviously, you know, wrong on a few critical and famous things. No, we're not all in love with our mothers and
Yeah.
whatever. The Oedipal complex.
Medusa is a result. Medusa was a result of seeing your mother naked at too young of an age.
Yeah, no, but like it's very easy, I think, for people to latch on to the most unserious like quotes and often decontextualized quotes from a given thinker and then like point, laugh, dismiss, end the story. It's like, well, they had some other complex, interesting, and deep insights there. Like basically our whole notion of the subconscious or of the unconscious comes from Freud. That's pretty big, you know. Does anyone doubt that? I mean, I'm sure some people do, but most people acknowledge that the subconscious is very real. And maybe some people have built on it in a more productive way, like Carl Jung or other people. But you know, the way, even the way in which Freud got certain things wrong, he did so with interesting stories that about who we are, that have shaped how we think about men and women and our relationship with civilization and so forth. And at a meta level, it's like the power and ability to tap into those stories. How do you tell those stories or break down those stories in a way that the body believes you? That is like that's a superpower. That's a very serious skill, and it can be approached in a number of different ways. In a way, like I was mentioning before we started talking, the main reason I started listening to John Deloney in the last week is because the last person I listened to all the time died. Freaking Scott Adams left us, or at least he stopped putting out work and got lazy all of a sudden. So I had to find someone else to listen to. But Scott Adams was big into this stuff, and his book, Reframe Your Brain, is about this kind of thing too. And much of what John Deloney is talking about and these other therapists talk about can be understood as reframes, but they call them stories because they're therapists as opposed to reframes, which is hypnotist language.
Well, and there's different models of therapy in the therapy world, and reframing your life, taking ownership of your thought process is a good thing. Like the cognitive approach doesn't require a therapist. At all.
You're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT?
Yeah. But behavior modification, lots of people outside, like a lot of guys that have, that would never go to therapy to see a therapist are also, the same guys could be very interested in changing their behavior.
Right.
Controlling their macros, getting to the gym, or spending time with their family.
And why do I resist this so hard? That is like an interesting question that's worth exploring. I have been like proselytizing to other people the value of tracking macros for people I know who are trying to lose weight. I have been trying to gain weight for the past 6 going on 7 years. I have never once tracked macros. Never once. Why not? Like, I should. Why do I not do that? And it's I couldn't give a good reason why I don't. I just have this aversion to it. And if I explored that, there's probably some, reason to that I'm not doing it. Some reason in my past that created an aversion to paperwork and stuff. And there is something to the old kind of masculine, manly frame of like, just freaking do it, dude. Like, quit coming up with excuses, quit like internalizing your problem. If you want to be a morning person, wake up early. If you want to gain weight, track your macros. If you want to do this, do that. And it's so simple. And it's like it sounds so masculine to say it that way. And there is value in being able to do that. But very often you're running into there are real limits to your willpower. If you are sleep deprived, if you are sleep deprived and are running on bad nutrition and a poor social life, your willpower is going to be like 0. You're not going to be able to control yourself in those circumstances.
Willpower is it's like a temporary sort of almost, it's like a temporary mind-body experience that is that only happens at that time. It's very different than having like a sense of I am capable of doing this.
Yeah. And
actually,
so one of the
believing you can do something is more powerful than a temporary will in that moment.
Right. And what's fascinating is to see in real time the connection between the reframing of a story and the feeling of agency that follows from it. Like, I'm not 100% on John Deloney's team. Like, I'm not Christian, although I'm not sure how Christian he actually is. Because I've never once heard him recommend someone go to church or go to a priest. I've heard him recommend people go to counseling and therapists a lot. So like, which worldview is more dominant here? But like, he's always pushing people to greater degrees, to the next tier of agency, into like, all right, what are you going to do? How are you going to take charge of and own the stories you're telling yourself, and quit rationalizing things so that you can take action? And that's a very powerful thing. And a lot of people, men and women, are trapped in patterns of inaction that seem to actually get solved, and result in that willpower emerging in their behavior when that story gets reframed. And I think that's that's something that the narrative of, oh, men just do things, actually gets in the way of for people. Like, oh, real men don't work out, real men just lift things. If something needs to be lifted, you just lift it. It's like, well, if you had trained in advance, that lifting would be a lot easier, you know. And there's this great line from Aristotle's Rhetoric where he says, again, it is absurd that people would feel ashamed of being unable to use their limbs, but not feel ashamed of an inability to use their words to argue, defend themselves, and to advance themselves, when the use of words is more distinctive to the human animal than the use of limbs. And I think that applies as much to this power of reframing and personal storytelling as it does to winning a debate or justifying your actions or making an argument or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, what our limbs are equally important. I mean, you know, it's, unless you're like Stephen Hawking or something, where you know all you have is, you know, your brain, and you know, thinking
and friends.
Yeah, but it's
Stephen
like, you know,
Hawking's in the news for his friends recently.
but, you know, but people then also, like, you know, like people are held back by thought patterns, right? And then when an action is finally taken and you do the thing, there is an experience of relief. You know, you're having a negative experience, let's say, you know, not getting to the gym, and you keep going through this loop of not getting there, but you're constantly thinking about it and feeling bad about it, feeling, you know, seeing yourself as like, you know, less worthy. But then when you finally do the action, you experience relief from that negative emotional state. And that is like a step that, you know, oh, I can do this. And then you can hopefully continue it. And then it becomes a new frame, a new way of thinking about the world, about yourself.
When I think understanding how these narratives and stories work in a semi-therapeutic mode of looking, of introspection, can help you understand why your body and your mind respond to these experiences in that way. Why does missing the gym make me feel less worthy? Why does finally going bring this sense of relief and like, oh, I'm back on track? Why is that? And I think one of the things that John Deloney brought up in his book is he breaks down types of narratives. And the way he did it is interesting. For myself, I broke it into an acronym that I call VICE. It's first, there are narratives of value. What worth do I have? And these, he say, come from other people. So there's value, there is identity, narratives of identity. These come from ourselves. There are narratives of context, which you inherit, you're born into. This is your nationality, your religion, your all that kind of stuff. And then very curiously, he says there are, I said events. There are things that happen. And he said the events are reality. He goes so far as to imply that I don't know how explicit he is about this, but he seems to imply that events are actually the only story that happen in reality, which is questionable on a number of different points, because there is this Nietzschean argument that there are no facts, there are only interpretations, right? Because an event can happen, but what is the meaning of that event, right? Suppose an event happens. I killed someone. Oh my gosh, I'm a murderer. I'm a bad person. Well, context. The person I killed was a pedophile. That sort of changes the meaning of this event, doesn't it? Identity. Like, is my self-conception of a warrior and a defender of the innocent? It's like, whoa, that's like good, solid meaning. Or is it that I'm a law-abiding person, and even if that person's bad, I don't break the law. I just violated my identity. You know, like the meaning of events can change very dramatically based upon the narratives that surround it, the value, the identity, the context, and so forth. And so, in the absence of the valence narratives that give events meaning, it's hard to say what he means when he implies that events are like the only things that happen. And I'm wondering if that is itself a narrative tool. Like, saying these are the only things that are real creates it sort of primes the ground. It levels the ground so that John Deloney can pour his own foundation there and construct new narratives on this flat ground of no narratives are true except for the events. Scott Adams, I think, did his own version of this in his subscription to simulation theory. I don't know if he believed in it or not. I know he promoted it, and I'm 90% sure he promoted it because he believed that if other people believed in simulation theory, they would feel their own sense of agency increase. They'd be like, well, if we're in a simulation, anything is possible. I can do things with my mind, because how else would anyone do anything? You know, I think it's like a meta hypnotic framework that he pushed to make people more susceptible to persuasion. And in the same way, I wonder if the idea that only events are true narratives is a persuasion technique to make it easier to deconstruct old narratives and rebuild new ones. This is all very speculative, but it's stuff to think about, and I think it's valuable. I hope it's valuable, anyways, for people who are listening, and not to just be aware of the poison of therapy, because some therapists are like very dangerous. I was talking to another bull earlier today who said that of those therapists, like he was like, therapy in its best form is absolutely amazing and super important and helpful. And 80% of therapists should not be practicing. And of the 20% that are remaining, about half of them are doing a good job. So, like, there's a lot of there's a lot of danger, even with good intentions, with these kinds of powerful tools. And it's good to be aware of that power and of that capacity, but also, like, if you're not going to take charge of it, someone else will probably do it for you. In one way or another.
There's a lot of bias in the training, in the organizations. I think especially when it comes to men.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Have you ever been to talk therapy?
You know what? I have. Years and years ago, I went to, at my parents' request, to talk to an old Irishman in North Seattle, and over a supposed video gaming addiction. In about a session and a half, he and I were both on the same page. I did not have a problem. My parents were just worried about other things, that like the fact that I played video games sometimes at that point in my life became the sort of directed object of their concern more generally. And I remember really enjoying talking to him. Like I would look forward to it because I liked talking to him. But eventually I began to feel bad, like I was wasting my parents' money. But what I walked away from with was he was in his mid 60s. He was a very cool guy, but he was alone. And he mentioned in one of our meetings, he's like, it's hard, being alone in your older age. And he was like really looking for, a woman to just spend the last decade or two of his life with. And I remember like leaving that period of time being like, I do not want to be that guy when I'm old, when I'm like alone in my old age like that. That looks, he made it sound just sad, So I got value out of it.
How old were you?
I would have been, 20, 21, somewhere in that territory, I think. Yeah. I think
so. You have addiction in your 19. Past.
Not according to the therapist, I did.
I was made to go.
This is my addiction. I'm drinking coffee at 8 at night. That's addiction.
I was made to go as a kid, and then even as a teenager as well, but it didn't do anything. It didn't. I don't believe that there was any benefit, and and I could see later how there was a sort of the whole thing about like trying to deal with the past. Like and my life improved not as a result of dealing with the past, because the past wasn't going to change. What improved things for me, I mean, it was grown-ups that thought I needed to go. I mean, whatever, but was just relationships with other people, just like just getting on with life.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there's not problems or things to worry about or things to improve, but
that's a common criticism of therapy culture at large, is that like therapists are being used as basically prostitute friends. Like you're just paying someone to talk to you like a good friend would, and that the prevalence of therapy culture is just kind of a symptom of people, because of the internet, because of the ease of moving around, just not having close friends anymore, not having friends that they have 15, 20, 30-year relationships with, that they can say, dude, what you're doing is fucked up and you need to stop. And I'm going to like stop you. You're like, if you don't have a friend like that, you're probably going to need a therapist, or you're going to hurt yourself if you have certain tendencies or find yourself in certain contexts. Yeah. That's what friends used to be for. Yeah. Jack says an old guy therapist would have had much different training and would probably be really interesting. Yeah. I liked him. I thought he was super cool. As Taurmenos said, the regulating agencies do espouse an ideology and punish therapists who get out of line. Yes, the certificate givers have a say in the sort of ideological disposition of the sort of new generation. And as we've seen with how they went after Jordan Peterson, even the older generation of therapists who get too vocal and out of line.
And the last one that I ever went to, I was already an adult. Like for some reason I thought, I should seek this out. And like he basically was like, there's nothing, you have no reason to be here.
Nice.
Like he was just like, there's really nothing, there's nothing wrong. And I was like, I think you might be right.
That was
And
sort of where I wound up with my therapist as well, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's like I knew that from the beginning, but it's
And,
tricky too, because as Jordan Peterson says, it's also kind of important that your therapist be smarter than you are. And I don't know what like the average IQ of a talk therapist is. And intelligence in this regard is not just IQ, it's especially verbal IQ, but it's a certain worldliness and experience. And an ability to see through nonsense with speed and perception. I'm not dumb, but like I've listened to enough like Stefan Molyneux, who kind of played a therapist in some ways, and John Deloney. Like, wow, those guys have some perception. They can see through people's rationalizing lies very quickly in a way that like I'm pretty smart, but I can't do that. Like that comes from, I think, experience.
And so we kind of agreed that there's a lot of positives to behavior modification. Behavior modification is just a clinical term for, changing, changing. And we talked about how, that plays out in people's lives in all sorts of ways that has nothing to do with therapy. So, considering the idea of religion and that we are, fellows within the same religious framework, like how do, like
Well,
what is the benefit, like I happen to
there's
think that solar idealism is superior to therapy, and I happen to think that fire ritual it transcends any idea of needing therapy, if you know what I mean.
yeah. Well, people used to send people with problems to priests rather than to
Sure.
therapists. Therapists
Yeah.
have sort of replaced confessional priests in some way. But there's on that question of like behavior
we don't
modification
repent.
works and stuff.
We're not repenting.
There's a very famous novel on exactly this subject. It's a Christian novel. And it's called A Clockwork Orange. Perhaps some people listening have heard of it. Can this person be rehabilitated more or less against their will? I mean, they initially go along with it, but they're basically, they are BF Skinner behaviorismed into just a completely different way of thinking. Their brain is modified. But as the novel illustrates, it kind of doesn't work. It sort of works, but it's a proverbial Band-Aid on a bullet wound. And to borrow a much older example, we see at the end of Plato's Republic the myth of the man who lived a good life in one lifetime, but because it was only by habit, it was only because he had the bowling alley guardrails up, so he was like bowling strikes and spares the whole time with the guardrails up. But as soon as he ends up in a situation where the guardrails are down, suddenly he's not that great of a bowler anymore, and he chooses the life of a tyrant, and things do not work out that well for him. So I think CBT and other like behavioral modification type programs might have some use as like a last ditch, like, this guy's addicted to fentanyl, we've got to intervene hard to save him, and then we can figure out the like his internal motivations and all this other stuff later. Sure, there's a place for that. But I think what Plato talks about is education as an art of turning, an art of redirecting the gaze. And that's not like education and therapy are interesting, like opposite poles in the way we think about changing a person. Education is changing a person. There's one philosopher of education, I don't remember who it was, who said that if someone's behavior doesn't change, they didn't learn. I don't think that was John Dewey. I think it was someone else. Karate Elvis, the book was called A Clockwork Orange. It's a very famous book. And I think therapy is reactive. It's always trying to fix problems, fix absences, give names to the causes of problems. And if you get the name wrong, then you'll be chasing after, you'll be like a Japanese hungry demon, just like always eating and never full. But education, and I think religious ritual is like education in this regard, is proactive. It is pursuing in a positive way. And so there's a sense in which maybe therapy will never be complete. Therapy will never be, you'll never escape your therapist. You'll always be back in the office with new problems until the therapy directs you back to something religious, in the sense of having a positive goal, a positive vision. And I think education does that. Maybe there's something tacitly religious. Again, as we discussed in a stream or two ago, not necessarily supernatural, but ordering in an axial way. Like, what are your values? What do you care about at that aesthetic primordial level that drives you, that gives meaning to your actions? And once you have that, a lot of your other problems are solved.
Yeah, and there's wanting to change or to improve or to be the best that you can be without having to have pathology as the starting point.
Yes.
It's not, it just simply, wanting to look better or to feel better than you currently do, or to learn something new or to take a risk. It's, that I see that as like a perfectly natural drive of life, as opposed to it having to be because something is wrong with me.
Yeah. And this point of narratives and the way that everything is treated as a narrative gets to maybe something else that is at the heart of therapy as a worldview, because some things are pre-wired, so to speak. Some things, like our disposition towards social competition and hierarchy, is not the result of how we were socialized in childhood. It's like, no. Humans are not like tigers. We're like lions. We're not like bears. We are like wolves. We are social pack animals. We have an instinct for hierarchy, just as we have an instinct for language. That's not the result of a narrative. That is the result of what we are at a factual level. You can say, well, those are narratives too. Well, yes, but they're not narratives in the sense that they are arbitrary and changeable. Yeah.
Exactly.
Karate Elvis says, Jack, I've been reading a book by Tom Billinge, Undying Glory, The Solar Path. There's a section on Hercules. I think I have that book. Tom Billinge is a very interesting character. He was writing about that stuff before we were getting into solar idealism, I think. So Tom Billinge is an interesting character. People should look him up. Very, very interesting martial arts. Very, very esoteric. I haven't read it. It's on my shelf somewhere. But he looks very Evola adjacent, but it's like Evola mixed in with like pancration and weird like Greek boxing and stuff. So it's like, all right, looks fun. Lots of maces. Fun stuff.
It's good to have books you haven't read yet.
I've got a lot of those. I've got a lot of books that I've read the first 10 to 15 pages of, That's my therapy. Is I just buy more books. I don't read them. I just
Like,
buy them.
looking
I'm
at
a
your
woman.
Instagram feed, like when you post books, I'm like, he's some kind of fucking speed
I
reader, man.
I am not speed reading them. I am reading them. I am reading at least the first 15 to 20 pages. I'm actually about 50 pages into John Deloney's book. It's I had a rule that I didn't realize I was following it until I bought this book. Which is I never buy a book with the author's cover or with the author's face as like the cover image, you know. Most politicians write books that way. And I realized this book by John Deloney, which is like own your past, change your future, or something cringy like that. It has his face like right on the cover, and it's like the content is good. The writing style is what I can only describe as like New York Times bestseller style, and I hate the writing style. Like it's such a drag. Um
Own
it's a
your
very
past. What does that even mean, though? Own your past. I mean, like,
so it's going back to the title makes sense. It's cringy, but it's about taking agentic ownership of the stories that you're telling yourself. So your past is about the stories you tell yourself about your past.
okay, yeah,
And my understanding of John Deloney is that he's actually a big opponent of the sorts of therapy talk people who would say that like everything you do is a result of your childhood trauma. And so,
yeah.
you need sympathy. You need, you've got an ACE score of 5. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Whatever. He's like, that's all fine. It's good to know that. But what are you going to do? Right. So own your past, change your future. Again, just awful title, but there's a sense to it, and I think it hits with a certain kind of audience in a certain kind of bell curve region. That like it is about taking positive possession of the stories that you tell and the narratives that are running in your subconscious there. Which is like not a bad message. I'm not going to
No, I mean,
recommend the book just on style points. I don't like the writing,
narratives
but the
can,
content's great.
the stories we tell ourselves can, hold us back from, being what we want to be. But
And they can guide
also,
us towards what we want to be. I mean, what is solar idealism if not a religious narrative that worked for us where other religious narratives did not work? I mean, I think all of us in the order have like different relationships with Christianity. Like Jack obviously does not like Christianity. I actually don't mind. I kind of like Christianity. I like talking to Christians about theology. I enjoy it. I especially enjoy Job and Ecclesiastes. The story just doesn't work for me. It just the story doesn't work for me. With no hatred or even aversion to it. It just doesn't work. And like, oh yeah, there's these negative side effects that come on the other side of that. But the story of solar idealism and the first fire and the first men, that story works. It is descriptive. It is psychologically true. It is like it works, and the workability of these stories, and not it won't work for everybody, I'm sure, but you know, it's not like stories are not just a way to escape pathological behavior and not just the cause of pathological behavior. They're also the cause of positive, productive behavior in pursuit of arete and excellence and quality and virtue.
and solar idealism, the Order of Fire in particular, it there's a variety of stories that one can
Sure.
become interested in. And we also we say make your life mythic, which is
Yes.
a way of saying write your story and write a really good one. But also the Order of Fire has a foundation of not just ideas, but a foundation of men in a group.
Yes.
Which
I'm smiling because I think this means that we get to tell Jack later that we just announced that the Order of Fire is officially a therapy group.
No, it is not. You know, a side point.
I'm sorry, that is a joke.
About dealing with the past, you know, and grinding through things. Many years ago, I was in this. I was with this Buddhist monk, a Thai Buddhist monk, and I can't even remember what it was that we were discussing. There was a few of us there, but this Buddhist monk says, "What you know?" He says, "You know, you can just walk around the rock." He goes, "You don't have to hammer and hammer and hammer at the rock. Just walk around it and go forward."
Yeah.
And that's the only, you know, that's the coolest thing from anything to do with Buddhism that I ever took from it. And I was like, you know, that kind of makes sense. It's like, was the past bad? Sure. Did awful things happen? Yeah, but I don't have to keep beating at it. Just walk around, just go around it, because there's a path after it.
And then on that note, like in the same way, this goes back to like the ways in which therapy might be viewed as a worldview unto its own. The internalization of all problems. Some problems really are external. You know, like we've been talking about the Epstein files, like collectively as a society, right? I don't think the problem with the Epstein files is that we have just not adapted our psyches to the reality of what elites are doing. You know, no, I think what they're doing is actually a problem. Is it the most important problem in the world? Actually, probably not. Actually, no. Is it a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. And the problem is not that like I've just not accepted it like a good stoic. You know, no, the people doing terrible things to children and is like, yeah, that's lamppost worthy. But like, if at the same level, if I'm obsessed with it all the time, you know, that's obviously a problem too. You know, if I'm like not cleaning my own house and letting my kids not get good nutrition and whatever. There's like, there's layers of prioritization and stuff.
But need therapy at that point.
Yeah, I mean, there can be problems of excessive externalization and problems of excessive internalization, and it takes judgment, it takes experience, and it takes, you know, trying to navigate that gap between the two extremes. Karate Elvis says, "For myself, I wanted to be a priest, but I couldn't for medical reasons." You know, I wanted to be a priest. I couldn't for belief reasons. I'm kind of curious what medical reasons would keep one from being a priest. Were you trying to be a member of the, like, what was it, Ignatius's order, Loyola or whatever, like the warrior priests or something? Yeah. Tough problems. Well, we've been going for about an hour. Is there anything else we wanted to add to the subject of therapy, or have we beaten this horse just about to glue paste?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. We'll settle with partial paste then. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll tune back in next week to talk about whatever else is popping up in the news or current events, or is interesting, or that you guys find interesting. If there's a particular topic you would like us to bring up from a solar idealism perspective, feel free to let us know. Leave a comment down below or message us in a private DM. We're always open to that sort of thing. So thanks so much for listening, and stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.